Ukraine's counteroffensive against Russian forces has not yet gained the momentum that some overly optimistic observers anticipated. So far, it feels like the prelude to a more expansive act. Offensive operations so far have yielded modest gains in the southern regions like Zaporizhzhia, with multi-layered Russian defenses proving tough to crack. The area is seen as a major target for Ukraine, as it would mean breaking Russia's land bridge between annexed Crimea and eastern Donetsk. But there are also signs that Ukrainian forces are spreading their bets, looking to pare back Russian gains around Bakhmut and exploiting what they perceive elsewhere in the east. Rather than a display of overwhelming force that concentrates newly formed brigades in one direction, the Ukrainians appear to be trying to pull Russian units in different directions, working out which might be weak or exploiting lines separating different battalions. On Thursday, an advisor to the head of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky's office, Mikhailo Podolyak, said the first goal was to wipe out as many Russian draftee units as possible and increase the psychological pressure on the Russian army. At the same time, he said, Ukrainian units are testing to see which areas are the weakest. This has included fresh assault operations around Bakhmut designed to force the Russians to send more units to defend a city they took more than 6 months to destroy and occupy. On Friday, the commander of Ukrainian land forces, Oleksandr Syrsky, said the Russians continue to move some of the most combat-ready units to the Bakhmut direction. Perhaps more surprisingly, there are indications that the Ukrainians are on the front foot near the city of Donetsk, along a frozen line of contact, and further south around what has been the equally static but highly kinetic Volodar front. The Ukrainians have the luxury of picking areas to attack. The Russians must try to defend a meandering front line nearly 1,000 kilometers long, with some units that have already been mauled and patched up. Still, it is a formidable task. In the south especially, Ukrainian forces must conduct a frontal assault against deeply prepared defensive positions, and critically they lack air superiority. The Russians have had months to fortify defenses here. There was never a chance that the Ukrainians would make the sort of lightning advances they enjoyed in Kharkiv last fall. The Institute for the Study of War also cautions that it's far too early for takeaways. Ukraine has not yet committed the vast majority of its counteroffensive forces, and Russian defenses are not uniformly strong along all sectors of the front line, it said this week. Matthew Schmidt, Associate Professor of National Security at the University of New Haven, agrees there are more questions than answers at this early stage. Are the Russians reacting strategically? Are they moving troops and supplies as though they see the current focus of the fighting as the main thrust? He says only a quarter or so of the total Ukrainian force is apparently engaged. What are the rest doing? Are the Russians confused about where they'll be used? The Ukrainians will be hoping that the Russian military command under Chief of Staff Valery Gerasimov, now in direct command of forces in Ukraine, will get some calls wrong. As Mick Ryan, a former general in the Australian Armed Forces, observes, there is an old saying that when your enemy is making mistakes, don't get in their way. For some time, Gerasimov has shown an aptitude for making strategic mistakes, not least with the ill-conceived initial assault in February 2022. So far, the Russian approach to defending their lines in the south appears to have worked relatively well, with the Ukrainians losing mine-clearing tanks and other armor that have become prey to artillery and aerial attack as they try to break through. Available open-source video suggests high use of anti-tank munitions is taking a toll on Ukrainian frontline units. A first echelon of forces repels or slows attacking forces before a second echelon of forces counterattacks against any enemy breakthrough, says the Washington-based Institute for the Study of War. One Ukrainian officer has acknowledged the challenge, writing that while obstacles can be effectively bypassed using mine-clearing vehicles, bulldozers, mine plows, and other engineering equipment, it becomes challenging to do so with the presence of drones which provide real-time data to enemy artillery and aviation. It's worth noting that Russian units in one heavily contested area belonging to the 58th Combined Arms Army are among the most effective in the military. After a lackluster performance to date, the Russian Air Force may be a critical factor in the weeks to come, says Matthew Schmidt, Associate Professor at the University of New Haven. That will depend on whether they are effectively employing glide bombs. Are their rotary aircraft able to safely operate? In other words, is their Air Force back in the mix because they've learned how to counter Ukrainian air defense measures?